All right, last page in our Unit 1 packet, which is nuclear fusion and fission. So we've already talked about nuclear chemistry relating to the nucleus of the atom, and that's exactly what fission and fusion still are talking about, is the nucleus of the atom. The very first thing when we talk about fission and fusion, both of these processes are going to change the nucleus of an atom. That's why they're called nuclear fusion, nuclear fission. Both of these also release huge amounts of energy, and that's why they are really important in society in general. Okay. Just as a side note, many of you might have heard about or know Einstein's famous equation, which is E equals mc squared. The E in this equation is energy, m is mass, and c is the speed of light squared. And c, the speed of light, is a really big number. And what this essentially is going to tell us is if a tiny bit of mass from the nucleus gets destroyed during a nuclear process like fusion or fission, a tiny bit of mass, when multiplied by the speed of light, a big number squared, is actually going to give us a huge amount of energy released. Okay, so our takeaway from Einstein's equation, just a little tiny bit of destroyed mass during a nuclear fusion or fission process is tons of energy released. And that's kind of the key takeaway from Einstein's equation. Fission and fusion are essentially opposites of each other. These two words you might have heard in other contexts before. So for fusion, you might have heard about that in biology. If two cells fuse together, that means that they stick together. In the process of welding, you're fusing two pieces of metal together. So fusing means two becomes one. So that's our definition of fusion. So two become one, just kind of as our generic definition of what the word fusion means. What we're going to see with our definition for nuclear fusion is we have two small nuclei, really should be nuclei, two separate nucleuses. And when we say that they're small, that just means that they have very few protons and neutrons overall. So something like hydrogen, that is one proton, or helium, which is two protons and two neutrons. They are going to combine into one. And so just for my little picture, here's, a hydrogen atom, for example. Here's another hydrogen atom, and they're going to combine into helium. Right, so two small become one that's still pretty small, because two small things don't add up to something huge. Fusion is the energy source for the sun. So that's where we see this most in everyday life. The sun takes hydrogen and fuses it to form helium, and it takes helium and hydrogen and fuses it to form lithium. And this process continues up until the elements start to get bigger and bigger, and there's not a ton of small elements left. And at that point, our sun, or suns in general, stars, start to die when they run out of fuel, because they run out of small things. They fuse them all together already. Fusion is also the energy source for the hydrogen bomb. So that's the H bomb. It's a type of nuclear bomb that is using hydrogen, small elements, a small element, in order to create this energy. So that's nuclear fusion. Nuclear fission is going to have the opposite. So if something fizzes, if you picture putting baking soda in vinegar, for example, you see fizzing, which is bubbling, and that kind of pops out of the container. In nuclear fission, we start with an atom, and it can go through fission all on its own. Usually we shoot it with a neutron just to give it a little bit of energy, but when that neutron hits the nucleus splits apart. Kind of like when you put baking soda into vinegar, that baking soda starts to pop and kind of go everywhere. So fission is when we have a large nucleus. So that means something that has lots of protons and neutrons. When we talk about fission, we're looking at big elements. We're typically looking at elements that are in like the bottom row of the periodic table that you see on the very, very bottom, where you see uranium and plutonium. So we're typically looking down there. This large nucleus is going to split into smaller pieces. And these pieces aren't truly small. If you take something that has 92 neutrons, it might split into something that has, what's easy math, 40 and 52. So they're not splitting into like teeny tiny pieces, but something that's smaller. So for example, let's say that we took something that was really big like this. It's gonna get split, not necessarily evenly. So I'll draw these two pieces as being kind of different sizes, but they're gonna get split into two chunks overall. And sometimes there's even more chunks. Sometimes there's extra little neutrons or extra small pieces that are fragments that get split off as well. Nuclear fission is the energy source for power plants. So anytime that there's a nuclear power plant in the energy production sector, that's using nuclear fission. This is also the energy source for the atomic bombs that were used in World War II. So the US dropped 2 atomic bombs in Japan in World War II, and both of those were fission bombs. And again, uranium, plutonium are really common sources for that initial element that's going to break apart and it gets shot with neutrons to facilitate that breaking apart process. Okay. Just as a note, the reason why nuclear fission is what's used in nuclear power plants, this is the type of reaction that at this point humans have the ability to control and to actually produce on Earth. The sun is a great example of nuclear fusion, but the sun is extremely hot and it has a really high pressure that pushes those elements together. And so at this point, scientists haven't been able to figure out how to do fusion on Earth to get those really high temperatures and the really high pressures without just like having explosions and chaos, essentially. So it's something that scientists are working on, but fission is what occurs on Earth for energy production. Fusion might be possible at some point in the future, but at this point, scientists haven't figured out a way to really harness nuclear fusion, to produce energy on Earth. Okay. We have a couple of questions down below, so read through the information here. You're going to identify each of these reactions as either fusion or fission.